Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Block Chat. This week we have episode number 100 and 133, if I recollect well. So today we're going to talk about what's happening in the APAC region. And for that, we have a guest who's a member of our team, our CMO, Julia Buchholz. I often call her the queen of tokenization of Australia, but she's very well connected across the APEC region, going to all the different conferences that happen there, both in Singapore, Hong Kong, and in Thailand. This time, she had a business trip to Kuala Lumpur, to Malaysia, with a couple of, and basically, what we wanted to do is an episode where we talk about what's happening in the region and why it's so important when it comes to tokenization. So Julia, hi and welcome to another Block Chat. How are you?
I'm very well, Dennis. It's been a while. Great to be here again.
Definitely.
Normally it's you and Makram running the show, and we just prepare the background.
Yeah, that's true. But then, we try to bring the team as much as possible into these conversations because, what most people don't know how we actually use block chats, and I say it more aloud recently than I did before, is we produce this content that's much more conversational, much less scripted. And what happens with this content is that it's very useful to you and your team in marketing. So I think it's something that other companies that are building in the space, but also in other parts can utilize this recipe of sorts of creating genuine content through conversations like this that can then be transformed into various smaller pieces of information, not just shorts, but as well blog posts and social media posts and in the end ideas as well.
Yeah, 100%. I think, we are in different time zones. Not everyone is available at the same time. And often it's that people only, can watch it like a week later or something like that. So we use this content really to produce so much different kind of content for our social media also. And we also run community campaigns always for the blog chat. So if community members, we ask them to actively share them, and they're going to be little giveaways and winners. So we always try to create a little bit of engagement around it and fun around it for our community. And then at the same time, it's just a great source for us of unique content that you cannot find anywhere else, basically, on the internet.
Yeah, amazing.
And I must say by now, Blockchat 133. That's like such a big educational library we have on our YouTube channel. So there is basically something for everyone to find, and strategies about tokenization and different countries and taxation and all of these kind of things. So
yeah, definitely. And talking about knowledge, one thing I'm being, very, you can see my hair is just, I don't have time for going to a hairdresser even the past couple of weeks. So, as you know, Julia, I went, down the rabbit hole of agentic AI, right? And
yeah.
one of the interesting parts when it comes to, we hear a lot of talking about agentic AI and workflows and automation. That's all fine. But the interesting part that, I've been really focused for the past week is knowledge, and the problem of agentic AI, for instance, with knowledge is that it tends to be forgetful. No matter the setup, if it's a cloud-based service or a local setup like I have, in the end, a persistent memory is the main challenge. And there's been some breakthroughs recently that were shared online in a couple of places, and it's basically it's possible now to build a central brain for your operation. And I think the content that we're producing through block chats does feed into that as well, because there's a lot of knowledge that in the past 10 years we've managed to accrue in terms of tokenized real estate that goes, I would say, underestimated, because until now this knowledge was sparse across different folders, files, different conversations, um, different videos, and in the end it was hard to put it all together. But now what I managed to do in the last week basically is to basically put it together and index it and reference it to each other. So an agentic AI now has a persistent memory, if you will. Um, and the cool part is that you can then, upgrade this memory, this central brain, so that it can be utilized not just by one individual, but a team, basically. In our case, the next step is going to be to not sure why you're clicking through this, but the next thing is going to be that basically we're going to bring in the executive team, so the CTO, the CMO, the chief operating officer, and the compliance part, to bring in, and be able to utilize this brain. And I think that's a strategic thing that a lot of companies building in the digital era should be aware of, especially the CEOs and the who are driving direction in specific in specific companies. What are your thoughts of how do you perceive this from a perspective of a chief marketing officer?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we use a lot of AI, especially for content creation. Now with Claude, it's so easy to build landing pages and all of this kind of stuff as well for, lead generation. So everything obviously is becoming much easier, but we always need to really check with our knowledge that the information is correct. So you always constantly have to feed in, first of all, your own information that you get. So this is where our video library really plays a big role. And really let it know only like what it was. So I think for the entire team at Blocksquare, using this, AI, I would say collective resource of everything is going to make it much easier. And maybe we can even take it in the future to the point that, the Blocksquare community can use it like its own AI bot or something. And, so maybe we even can get it there, that it's becoming so accessible for everyone and really only created by all our resources. That might be a good idea as well, I guess. But for now, we're just using it internally. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, that's where everyone is heading, right? Someone said the other day, a lot of people are leaving the blockchain space. They're all moving on to AI.
That's good for
So
us, right? That's good.
exactly, exactly.
That's great. We're gonna stick doing
gonna come
real
back
estate
later.
tokenization as we did that for the past 10 years almost,
Yeah.
and or 8 years now. It hasn't been 10 years, of course. Officially it's 8 years, but we're solving a big issue in the largest asset class in the world. So, I think it's worth sticking around. But going to our main topic for today is Malaysia, right? Malaysia is a market that you're very familiar with. You've been with the company in the past, actually from the time we met in Suk at the CV Summit competition.
In
Whizzle.
2018, 2019. Yeah.
Exactly. Whizzle. You were one of the finalists in the top 10 or top 5, I believe.
Top 4.
And top 4 actually. And Whizzle is a company built in Malaysia. So you are familiar with the Malaysian market, working with people there. But this time around, you went to Malaysia, to Kuala Lumpur, with a different goal.
Yeah,
Correct?
that's right. Real estate tokenization. So that was this time a little bit different, different audience, different conversations. So what we see in the APAC region, especially in the Southeast Asian region, probably the biggest difference to Europe is people. They're like the volumes of people in these countries. And what's happening over there is when you talk to a company there and they're considering bringing an app, for example, to the market, they instantly think marketing. Okay, we're gonna we have our partners in Thailand and in India, in China and Hong Kong, and this is now we're gonna bring them all into here, and so they always think big about people. And I think this was probably the biggest difference to sometimes other tokenization marketplace operator calls, for example, taken on here, especially from Australia. It's always about just thinking, oh, okay, what real estate assets are we going to use? Okay, this is going to be our marketplace. But the marketing thinking is not so dominant. So this is something that really stood out to me when I was in Malaysia. They just think big and people because they're used to it. Because Malaysia actually has a big background of network marketing. So Amway came from Malaysia and so on. So they're used to include retail. And retail, so the people are used to do work online and do network and do events together and bring each other to, into the platforms together. So I think the market is very strong on that side. And now what's happening, and that was very aligned with our travels, recently the Malaysian government basically issued a master plan for the capital markets to be fulfilled until 2030, where they basically actively asked them to look into new ways to build new products for the capital market, new ways, new infrastructures to build more access and inclusion into the products, that it is possible right now. And then obviously Malaysia, Islamic finance is a big thing there as well, find solutions for that. So that is basically all driven now by the regulator. And at the same time, Malaysia has the blockchain sandbox as well, and blockchain regulations. And here the roadmap on 25 until 27 is the roadmap, and it's very strong on real asset tokenization, real estate, and basically all the boxes that are interesting for us. So it's very innovation driven there, and they really want to build something. And right now is the gap where they mainly focused on institutions, but they are open to receive the input from industry to see what industry is already doing and what do they need to build around it regulatory wise, instead of the other way around. Let's set the regulation and ban innovation. So I think innovation is very welcome at the moment in the consideration, and I think this is why we were there at a good time.
And do you see from the conversations you had or from the information you gathered, is this something that's open just to Malaysian companies, or is it a worldwide, more global approach where any companies can kind of participate in? What's your take?
First of all, I think you always need a partner in that country, because you need the network, and they have very different influence there as well. So for us, being infrastructure provider, obviously we are highly relying on good marketplace operators, and that is the partner to open the countries. However, obviously we, with our experience and knowledge and as the infrastructure, if a partner, for example, goes into the sandbox or something like this, Blocksquare needs to support or will support, like to open a market like this and make it possible. And it is possible. However, they actually are really good and very welcoming for tech startups, tech companies. And personally, I know several who moved their businesses lately to Kuala Lumpur, for example, and also even from Germany, real estate businesses who are moving to Kuala Lumpur because of, I think there is good funding also available for the startup scene and education scene, and they're trying to build Malaysia as the new Web3 hub of Southeast Asia.
You mentioned in one of the earlier parts of our conversation, not sure why this is switching, but it seems like whenever you touch your laptop,
Sorry.
it just switches to something else. I don't know who gave you control
I don't
over
know
the
either. I
conversation that
normally
we're
don't have
having.
control. I give it all up to you
Exactly.
for good
I need
reason.
to revoke some permissions from you, I guess. But yeah, if you go back, one of the things that you've said, Malaysia is very retail oriented. Everybody is used to doing something at home as well. Like there's this hustling mentality that is across the nation, I guess. Um, at the same time, one of the big goals that you had is finding the big partners. And I think, that drives into the banking sector. And obviously, the regulation that you mentioned is about capital markets and products in capital markets. And that's also something that's driven, more top down from banks towards retail, right? Do you see adoption of tokenization happening bottom up? So, retail first and then the rest will come? Or is it something that in that market you see as something more from a top-down approach where you need to really have a good, strong partner like a banking partner or private bank or wealth management arm of a bank or anything similar to basically bring assets onto the market and then drive them downstream towards the retail sector?
I think it's exactly what you just said from the top down. I think either we just saw 3 days before we arrived was the news that the Malaysian sukuk was just tokenized together with Maybank, for example. So Maybank officially put their name behind it and was sending officially investors to that. It's basically a tokenized fund, tokenized bond, actually, and so they are basically it is driven from the banking sector, which I haven't. It's not. I think in Japan, when the tokenized is really big skyscraper, that also was with a bank together. So some countries go to market together with a bank and really do the pilots like that. And then other markets are more like, okay, let's bring on the smaller marketplaces first. Let's be more careful. Let's test. And I think Malaysia, you need a big, strong partner. Real estate is very big. There's one skyscraper after the other. So the whole investment and funding they have in their mind when they're talking about it, it's basically like, there's not even a point to tokenize anything below 100 million, So that is their mentality. They are thinking really big about it. And they have much less liquidity concerns from what I hear in conversations that we know from other markets. They're basically like, no worries, once we do this, it's a good project, we're going to go in with this, because they're thinking so much marketing in advance and they're so thinking, who do we know, how we are connected, what other groups can we partner up? That I think is a big difference in their perception for real estate tokenization. And that pilot there for the bond tokenization, for example, that was our 100 million tokenization, which was funded basically through the bank.
You see, we're talking about financial products from tokenized sukuk, which is kind of like a bond for in the European or international terms, and tokenizing equity, I guess. But all in all, I think it's more debt instruments that are being tokenized as well in relation to real estate. So if you're basically investing in private credit or tokenized debt or however you call it, where basically on the other end it's secured or backed somehow by a real estate asset. So in case of a default, there's I guess a case or a process where the investments or the debt can be repaid through the sale of that asset. Now, this is fixed income kind of type of products with an interest rate that might be variable but fixed in some part, etc. And it's supposed to be a lower risk type of product, but it's definitely not tokenized real estate. It's tokenized debt, right? And attaching it to real estate doesn't make it tokenized real estate, because just in a similar way, the way we tokenize real estate, we're basically tokenizing the economic rights that derive from the ownership of the real estate asset. So it's not like tokenized real estate in its full effect, tokenizing title of a real estate asset, which was piloted in Dubai, for instance, right? Which also kind of falls a bit, it's not the APAC region, it's the MENA region, but still, how do you see that difference between what's happening in Dubai in the approach of tokenizing real estate with, the examples you've brought up with Malaysia and Japan?
Yeah, so I think what I heard from the feedback, it was definitely a model, is like the model how we are doing it in Europe, tokenizing real estate and then connecting it to the title through that loan agreement, was something that was not familiar yet with the people there. However, every conversation I had started with, how can you make this secure? How can you make a tokenization secure? So security comes first. And then when we talked about how we're doing this in Europe, this is when it clicked. That's when they were like, this is actually really interesting. This is better than equity tokenization, many actually said. And they were actually saying there is marketplaces for equity out there, but they're all like really slow and they all have really, it's not so easy in that market. And we even had some who said, you know what, you should get in touch with these guys because I think your solution would be better than what they are doing, because they're trying to tokenize the equity of property funds, basically. And so, there's a lot of conversations happening. You mentioned one thing, fixed interest rate. Malaysia, one of the top priority is to find new asset classes and new infrastructures for Islamic finance, because I think something like 50% or something of the country basically can only access if they provide products for that. Now the economic right and direct real estate tokenization, how we do it, is absolutely referring to the income that the property generates. So if there's no income, you have no income because there is no revenue coming. So this ticks the box for them. And that, and the way, if you can structure that correctly, and if we can achieve also the title backing in Malaysia, as through partner there, then we have a very solid product, in my opinion, for that market. And this is why we actually had really good interest because it's innovation. So Malaysia is supporting innovation. Others are not so much supporting innovation. They just go towards like, let's digitize what we have. But here we are in a market where they're actively looking.
I think here when you mentioned this, you're talking about the contrast you see between Australia and Malaysia, right? Because you're very much present in the Australian market, and I guess that was the reference you were making, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. I mean, everywhere is step by step. Some are faster, some are slower, and some, I think a really, really big thing in tokenization is obviously licensing, cost of licensing, cost of marketing, who is allowed to actually market to, all of this. And we see, for example, in Australia, they are really restricting people working in the industry, and there's a big shift going away from the established people to actually new financial advisors and so on, who are really now only coming in the industry. But without that license, you're not even allowed to make any offerings anymore or help people, basically, right? So it's kind of like they try to innovate, they try to regulate, they try to bring the business in through regulation, but at the same time closing a lot of doors. Also for international solutions who might not so that's there. And I think financial wise maybe it is easier or better in Southeast Asian countries because of that. That is maybe not as expensive, or it's maybe easier, or you find the right partner over there who has them already. And within sandbox environments as well, it often can give you just a while to get everything ready, work with them, go to market active, and then sort out the rest later, when you're in this protected environment. And I think that's a big advantage. So I think that's always important to find a good marketplace operator in a country who wants to take on a business like that, bring innovation to that country, and then also basically, work with us together on doing so.
Now, talk about Malaysia, and you spent how much? A couple of days there? Was it
10
like
days altogether.
10 days?
I think it was 5 days in KL, and then I had a little bit of time to see that beautiful country.
Oh, okay. So is it, my perception of Malaysia is that it's very concentrated in KL, in Kuala Lumpur, the economic business activity, but then around that, you might have more rural areas. Is that so or not? What's your perception of Malaysia as a country?
So most businesses are launching from Kuala Lumpur, are in Kuala Lumpur. Back in the day, actually, when I was with Whistle, we decided to launch in Sabah because that's where the co-founders were from. And it was apparently the first tech launch ever in Sabah, and people just loved it. So you can be a little bit different there. However, I went later, for example, down to Penang, and I met there another tokenization expert. So we had a business meeting in Penang because he lives there. So people are all over Malaysia, basically. But obviously, Kuala Lumpur, that's the hub. That's where people register most of their businesses and are there maybe from Monday to Friday, and then they're off and go home or something like that as well, explore.
Malaysia is also home to a very interesting project, the network state. If I recall correctly, and this is like for those who never heard about it, it's a project from actually one of the godfathers of USDC, and you can look it up online. He's a very successful VC and entrepreneur overall. Made his career in the US, and now he's building this whole village, which is more of a town of sorts, around the concept of surrounding of the concept of things. Can you tell us a bit more, because I know you have your own perspective around this, and you wanted to go there and maybe do like an afternoon in that community, but that's not how it works, right?
Well, apparently the new thing is now that you have to book instantly, like a month, to stay there in order to actually access the community or do anything there. I don't think it's actually a thing. I think I know when I was at the network state conferences, and then they had open days after that, and so they are organizing actually open days. It was, I think, just this particular case now. Like in general, but what it is basically an island that was built by the Chinese, and then the property they never really finished it, and it's like a dead city. And then the network school decided to build their own. I think it's the only hotel there, or it's the best hotel there, or something. And I think they rented that for a year. And they have basically now all these tech entrepreneurs there in like a beautiful setup, and they're all together in this whole community. And I think it's really inspiring. Personally, I must say that, that's a trend all over Southeast Asia. You go in a cafe in Bali and it's full of crypto people and online marketers. You go in a cafe in Thailand, you find, and even in Phuket, you find like, a co-working space for crypto people. So, and people just go into these countries and they're living there for a while. They're working there. They're digital nomads, and you just connect. You just find your community. You can always find your crypto community, your blockchain community. Thailand is big in blockchain, big in real estate tokenization, actually very retail orientated. So I think Thailand is also, because it was such an early mover and they are so regulated, like their regulations are really, friendly for innovators, even tax. I think there's something like 5 years tax-free, capital gains tax-free. for blockchain startups and stuff like that. So they're doing a lot to bring businesses there, and this is where then Malaysia says, oh, we need to actually move as well, because we actually want to be the hub. So we actually need, we are a business hub. We're a very strong business. So you have KL, you have Bangkok, and then there's a lot of talks in Indonesia, obviously. They want to, but it seems that's a bit slow. You have Singapore, fully regulated. You have Hong Kong, which Singapore and Hong Kong are both more regulated for institutional. So you have all this different area, and now you have also the Lebanon area between Singapore and Malaysia. I think it is that area, this commercial area that's coming up, which is also a sandbox for Singapore, basically. So that's also a very, very interesting area to look into, but we haven't been there yet. That might be next on the list.
Well, these are all, these are all countries that have a huge potential of growth because of the sheer size of the population. This is hundreds of millions of people, and when that compounds, and when you add just a bit of GDP on top of it, it just creates an enormous wealth distributed across a population. At the same time, these are countries where the actual wealth is at very much concentrated in the top percent. So there's a big gap between the very, very wealthy and the retail part. And I think that might be the cause as well when you talk to certain parts of the population which thinks big, because they can think big, because it's being connected to a multi-billionaire is just it's very, very common for a top management part of the banking sector, for instance, and so forth. So it's possible to think this way. And on the other hand, you have the support of this huge retail part, which is infinite in a way to think of. And these are huge nations. Then on the same kind of geographic area, you have the Korea case, where it's like 40 million people, and they're great at what they do. They built Samsung, they built many global companies. So it's a small country that did really well, in contrast to all these big countries that maybe have other challenges, I would say, as well. But it's for sure that financial hubs in Asia are centered around Singapore, Hong Kong, and then you have Kuala Lumpur. Bangkok is a bit behind, but still, it's growing into that direction, I guess. I haven't been for a while, so I don't know how to comment. You've been much more frequently in Bangkok as well. And then you have, like you said, in Indonesia, Jakarta, which is, this country that's dissected through all these islands. So that's a challenge of its own, with different cultures. And then you have the Philippines.
Philippine Blockchain Week, yeah, that's a big one every year as well. Lots of people go. Philippines, they love crypto, same as Vietnam. Also, they love crypto.
So that's that part of the region, and then obviously, you have the China and the India, but let's not go there. But what I'm saying is, it's a part of the world that has a huge retail potential. When you connect that retail to real estate in Europe, for instance, which is unattainable for most of these people, if you structure it really well, I think that's an opportunity. It's also an opportunity just to connect it with the local real estate assets as well. And I think, the work that you've done now, being in Kuala Lumpur for a couple of days, opening up all of those conversations you did a really good job together with our partners. And I think that's kind of really important. But just we need to wrap up a bit the conversation we're having today. I know that we're organizing I think a Twitter space, or an X space, in next week, I believe. Can you tell us a bit more to our audience who might be interested in tuning in there, and what is that going to be about?
So that's going to be on the 27th of May at 1 p.m. UTC. We're going to have Kevin from PropBase. So he's going to join us from Thailand. We're going to have DigiShares Klaus from Europe, yourself, Dennis, and two others, which I need to look up right now, connections from Hassan, our partnership manager. So we're going to have a good conversation. I think we're going to turn it around a little bit this time. We're going to really talk about the challenges, liquidity, SPVs, economic right, everyone. But we're going to address it this time really to have a very honest conversation. That's what we want to do. So everyone, and because everyone tokenizes different and comes from different regions in this upcoming X-Space, I think it will be a really nice global view and different perceptions of the markets and all of that.
I think it's going to be, I mean, the lineup is pretty good. I think Klaus and Kevin have been building in the space for years now, and it's going to be an honor to share the space with them. And obviously
sorry,
the
I
rest
forgot.
of the lineup that you mentioned.
I forgot one very important one, the most important one, Landhive, Jens.
Jens from Landhive, who I've met in
one.
Paris a couple of weeks ago at Paris Blockchain Week. He's very good in explaining tokenization to the audience and is definitely a great partner to have in our ecosystem as well. Let's not forget he's a certified partner using Blocksquare's infrastructure. So looking forward to this discussion. And to everyone who watched us today, thank you so much for joining. I hope you enjoyed the conversation Julia and I had about tokenization in Malaysia and the APAC region in general. Stay tuned and stay safe on the markets. Things are happening in various directions. Make sure you're